Okay, Chapter 7, Flexible Budgets, Direct Cost Variances, and Management Control. So we have, it looks like seven different learning outcomes in this chapter. And what the chapter is mostly about is understanding static budgets and flexible budgets, and then the variances that go along with them. Okay, and then we'll add into that at the end. We'll talk about standard costs and also do price and efficiency variances, talk about how managers use them, and describe benchmarking and its role in management. So basic concepts here is a variance is the difference between actual results and expected or budgeted performance. And the expected performance is also called budgeted performance. And management by exception is a practice by which managers focus more closely on areas that are not operating as expected and less closely on areas that are. Okay, that would just make sense. It's like having kids and you have to watch the one who's in trouble all the time. Now, a static budget is another name for the master budget. It's based on the level of output planned at the start of the budget period, and just think that we came up with those numbers probably 5 to 7 months before the start of that period. So it's called the static budget because the budget for the period is developed around a single static planned output level. For the way we evaluate variances is we'll say that a favorable variance has the effect of increasing operating income. Okay, means like actual revenues exceeded budgeted revenues. Okay, for revenue anyway. So for cost items, F or favorable means that costs are less than the budget. Okay, so you can't take numbers and say, well, if I subtract them and it's positive, it's good, or if it's negative, it's bad. You can't do that because revenues and costs are treated like in the exact opposite way. Okay, so for revenue items, U means actual revenues were less than budgeted revenues, so that would be unfavorable. And for cost items, U means that actual costs exceed budgeted costs, and that would also be unfavorable. Now, variances can be calculated at multiple levels, and those levels are identified with level numbers. So the broadest variance is a level 0, and it is a very macro view showing the difference between actual and static operating income. Further analysis breaks down the level 0 variance into progressively smaller and smaller components, attempting to answer questions such as like how much were we off by, and where were the problems? Okay, where were we off, and how come? Okay, what happened? Now for level 1 analysis, illustrated right here, this takes the static budget variance, okay, that's level 0, and breaks it down by line item. So as a result, in addition to knowing that we fell short in operating income, okay, like we were short in operating income where actual was 14.9 and we planned on 108, I guess we were a little short. So we were $93,000 off. We also know how we got there. So this would tell us where the bigger problems were. And it looks like direct materials, somebody made a big mistake right here. That's about all of our variance, but we've got a lot of unfavorable variances here. Okay, so column 1 represents the actual results, column 3 has a static budget, and column 2 in the center is the level 1 variances. And that's the difference between the static budget and the actual results. Now at variance levels 2 and 3, this answers the questions, why were we off? With level 2 and 3, we can get quite specific about what went wrong in our operation that caused the shortfall in operating income. Okay, so the flexible budget calculates budgeted revenues and budgeted costs based on actual output. Okay, that's the flexible part, are the units. The flexible budget is prepared at the end of the period, and managers know the actual output. It's the hypothetical budget that would have been prepared at the start of the budget period if they correctly forecast the actual output for the period. In other words, had they known in advance what the actual output would be. And with the flexible budget, the selling price is the same, the budgeted unit variable cost is the same, and within the relevant range, the total fixed costs are the same. Okay, but we're just looking at changes in quantity. So these are they like steps in this book. These are the steps to identify the actual quantity of output, calculate the flexible budget for revenues based on the budgeted selling price and actual quantity. Okay, so that's budgeted selling price and actual quantity of output. And then calculate the flexible budget for costs based on the budgeted variable cost per output unit, actual quantity of output, and budgeted fixed costs. Okay, so these 3 steps enable a company to prepare a flexible budget, and it allows for more detailed analysis of a static budget variance for operating income. Now this is a sheet, this is the way I think of these variances. Now this is a level 2 analysis, and we'll look at details like on the next slide, okay? This is the detailed analysis, but let's just look at how you can classify this. Think in the first place that we've got actual, flexible, and a static budget. Okay, those 3 columns, actual, flexible, and static. And the actual is the actual price, and this should have a little sub U in here, actual price per unit times actual quantity. So the actual price is a unit price, and these are times total quantities. These are all the units right here. Okay? Then take the actual quantity and repeat it right there to flexible. Flexible is actual quantity times the standard price. That's our flexible budget. Okay, so actual is actual quantity, actual price. Flexible is the actual quantity times the standard price. And then the far right side of it, the static budget, is standard price, standard quantity. Okay, that would be a static budget. So now if we take the difference between actual and flexible, I can take out the common term here, actual quantity, and multiply it times actual price minus standard price. Okay, now actual quantity is going to be a big number. These are all of our units. The actual quantity and standard quantity are prices by okay, then for the sales volume variances, this would be the selling price. All right, if we subtract these two expressions here, this is the difference between flexible and static. So selling price times, take out the common term, times the difference between units, actual quantity and standard quantity. Okay, now remember that the selling price is the price per unit, and the actual quantity minus standard quantity, these are big numbers here. And so you can't have like a big number here with like the total selling prices, like the total amount that was sold times the total quantity. That wouldn't make any sense. One has to be per unit, and one's going to be a big number. And the other thing is that the standard quantity is the standard quantity for actual units produced. Okay, standard quantity times actual units produced, and we'll look at that when we look at more of the solutions to the problems. Okay, I think that's it. But when let's say that you're on an exam and all of a sudden all the variance stuff falls out of your head because you get nervous, if you can write down this formula, no matter what the variance is, you can get to what you need. And start out with AP. And think of it, sometimes I'll put a $sign here because I'll remember that. So actual price times actual quantity, then repeat the actual quantity times standard price, repeat standard price times standard quantity. Okay, then subtract them and you're ready to roll. And no matter what the variance is, you can get to where you need to go. So here's an example of a level 2 analysis, and in the first column, the actual results are reported, and the third column represents the flexible budget. Okay, the fifth column has the static budget. Now the second column provides the variances, between our actual results and the flexible budget. These variances are the flexible budget variances. They help us understand what results we should have had for the level of volume compared to what was actually obtained. Okay, so for example, we thought here we're right on with the units sold. Okay, $10,000. It's exactly, or 10,000 units is exactly what we thought we would sell, or what the flexible. No, that would be the same, because that's what the flexible budget does. But we've got a difference in revenues of 50,000. Okay, now there's still more to find out about this. All of our costs are unfavorable, whole thing. Okay. So it's a good thing we made up 50 there. With sales volume variances, our static budget, we thought we'd sell 12,000 units. Instead, we sold 10. So we've got a 2,000 unit static budget variance, okay, just for units. And that results in a $240,000 unfavorable sales volume variance just for revenues. Okay, so that's a really big shortfall there. These are all favorable. Looks like we made it up along the way, and we end up with a $64,000 unfavorable. So this fourth column provides the difference between the static and the flexible budget. And it's called sales volume variance because it tells us how much we gained or lost as the result of a volume difference between what was originally anticipated and what was actually achieved. Okay, the flexible budget uses the budgeted per unit data. Okay, the budgeted per unit data applied to actual units, and it represents what our budget would have been had we budgeted correctly for volume. I'm not sure correctly is the right word, if we had a crystal ball, put it that way. So the other thing now down here, you want to start paying attention to these. The level 1 variance is the difference between actual and static budget. Okay, so it would be sort of the total variance. It would be if you took 108 minus 14.9. Okay, is 93.1 is the static budget variance. Okay, and pay attention to the titles too. Somehow you've got to get a lot of things in your head out of this. Here we've got flexible budget variance, and the flexible budget variance is the difference between the flexible budget and actual results. Okay, sales volume variance, so here we're looking at, here our quantity is the same for both of these. Over here we've got our actual quantity and our standard quantity. So that is the sales volume variance. And the two together help explain that $93,000 unfavorable. It's a pretty big number. And we know the 64,000 of it was just based on sales volume. Okay? So the sales volume variance is the difference between a flexible budget amount and the corresponding static budget amount. The flexible budget variance is the difference between an actual result and the corresponding flexible budget amount. So let's take a closer look at sales volume. So here are some reasons why an unfavorable sales volume variance might occur, where actual sales are less than budgeted sales, right? So failure to execute the sales plan, weaker than anticipated demand. Okay, there's not much you can do about that. Aggressive competitors taking market share. Okay, unanticipated market preference away from the product, that all of a sudden nobody's buying hula hoops anymore. Okay, or quality problems. So how a company responds to an unfavorable sales volume variance will depend on what its managers believe caused the variance. If, for example, the underlying cause is market, okay, like 1 through 4, those are all based on the market, the sales manager is most likely to be able to explain the cause. If, on the other hand, there are quality problems, the production manager would be in the best position to explain what happened. The sales volume variance is the difference between the flexible budget amount and the corresponding static budget amount. Now, the flexible budget variance is the difference between the actual result and flexible. Okay, so it's actual and flexible. We're over on the left side of that chart. So now let's take a closer look at flexible budget variances. So if a company has, for example, an unfavorable material cost variance, we can find out that it was due to a company using a greater quantity of inputs, okay, versus the budgeted quantities of those inputs, or having to pay higher prices per unit for the inputs than the budgeted price per input, okay? It's a lot easier when you talk about material versus labor. Let's come back and we'll pick this up in the next presentation.